This is the third tutorial on tactical combat. We will deal with operational combat later on. Here we have the combat of 3 squadrons, which is the maximum you can have in any engagement between the Iranians and the Soviets. We have 3 MiG-23 squadrons of Soviets that have intercepted 3 squadrons of F-4 Phantoms. I've turned over the units here to indicate the numbers. Just to go through the numbers here, the top left is the anti-ground bombardment, the middle left is the anti-air, the bottom left is the anti-ship, the top right is the ECM, the middle right is the anti-submarine warfare, and the bottom right is the number of hits an air unit can absorb, and the bottom number here is the range in hexes to and from the target. So in other words, a unit has to go out 20 hexes and has 20 hexes to come back if they're flying a MiG-23. So in this particular engagement, you can see the missions that have been assigned to the aircraft. All of the MiG-23s are anti-air. 2 of the F-4 Phantoms are anti-air, and 1 is a strike mission. These would normally be hidden from the other player, either underneath the air unit or somewhere on the map beyond the visibility of the opponent. So you don't know what the precise mission or armaments are of aircraft going into the air. Now the game system is actually fairly simplified. We have here a chart. The bottom row is for the application of air power against ground units, and the top row is the numbers that we use in terms of hits inflicted on air by air and naval by naval units. So let's commence with the combat. Essentially, the combat is simultaneous. So we'll start with the Russian player. We're going to assume that there's an average roll of 5 that affects that both the Russians and the Iranian player roll. So the basic procedure is to conduct an attack by each of the attackers, and then to sum up that value, and then to roll the ECM of the opponents to reduce the damage. So the MiG-23 has an anti-air rating of 6. The other combat values are of no use when it's in an anti-air mission. So we roll a theoretical 5. You subtract the number you rolled from the anti-air rating, and that gives you a difference of 1. Now this chart here, you move the marker a number of spaces equal to the difference between the roll and the value. So if you rolled a 5 and the anti-air value rating is 6, you rolled less than, there's a 1 difference. So you typically want to roll less than the combat ability on a ship or an air unit. If we'd rolled a 5 here as well and a 5 here as well, you'd have a total of 3 spaces less than the air value. And then you would roll a 5 on the ECM rating. Now, a 5 is higher than a 4, which means there would be no effect. But if the Iranians had rolled a 1, that which is 3 less, then we would have moved this marker up 3. But in this case, the Iranians roll a 5, there's no effect on the ECM, and so this marker remains here. Now we can read here, there's 2 hits. The hits have to be distributed as evenly as possible, and so the Iranian player would put 1 hit on each of these anti-aircraft, anti-air aircraft. Those are we just applied some hits. Now the Iranians would do the same combat back. The Iranians have an anti-air rating of 6. If they rolled a 5, and a 5, they'd have 3 less than. That would result in 2 hits on the Soviet units. Here we are. Now, for those units that received a hit, the hit is subtracted from their total hits. You can see here the Iranian has got a 2. And so these units are not destroyed because 1 hits equal the number of hits on the unit is destroyed, and these hits are less than. So any aircraft that receives a hit is aborted. So the Iranian aircraft here fly home, the Soviet aircraft here fly home, and what we're left with is one strike aircraft and a surviving Soviet interceptor. This strike aircraft is going somewhere to bomb a target, possibly a ground unit. Now, the escorts that were escorting it were aborted, and so we have a second round of combat against the escorted unit. What we would do is compare the number of Iranian escorts to the number of Soviet interceptors, and if there are any extra Soviet interceptors, they could attack. Now, in this case, there are no escorts, so this Soviet interceptor can attack this Iranian unit, and this Iranian unit cannot respond because it's on a strike mission. Its air combat capabilities do not function. So if the Soviet would roll a 5, it would be 1 less, and if the Iranians would roll a 5, it's higher than the ECM rating. There's no modification, so there'd be 1 hit inflicted on the Iranian aircraft, which would cause the aircraft to abort, and then the MiG-23, successful in its mission, would then return to base. Now, there's a supply point cost for all this. All anti-air missions and ferry missions and reconnaissance missions, or any mission in which you're flying, but you're not conducting an attack against a ground target or against a ship or against a submarine, is only 1 supply point cost. Any strike missions cost two supply points. So attacking ships, attacking air bases, attacking ground units will cost you 2 supply points. Everything else will cost you 1 supply point. All right. So this concludes the tactical air combat tutorial.